you kindly, Mr. Fisher, reminding us about the commitment that banks and financial institutions like ABSA are making to the continent and providing solutions for many of the challenges that have been highlighted. And this is also refreshing because as we started off this morning, we're building up on the themes and concepts that have been shared, understanding that business remains committed to its key mandate. We're seeking to influence the political or policies within the political agenda to ensure that ongoing partnership is developed. Africa remains open for business. We're tapping into the opportunities that exist. And most importantly, it's time to also underscore what new markets do mean, how it is that they are shaping not only the business, but also the global agenda overall. Our next panel, just before lunch, so do ensure that you listen very keenly to the insights and feedback that will be shared by our next few speakers, because they will deep dive into how new markets are being opened and what key developments need to be understood there. We'll hear from 3 speakers, one largely reflecting on the role function of financial services and key players using technology to leverage opportunities in financial services. We'll hear from another key player who will also share feedback with us, taking care of a company that rather plays a critical role in infrastructure and investment, and another focused on fast-moving consumer goods. So we'll take a look at how best it is that new markets do develop new leaders. I'd like to introduce our first panelist who will be joining us, taking a seat in the chair to my left-hand side. We'll follow through with several speakers who will join us for this particular engagement. Allow me to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of Kadin, Indonesia, Mr. Anindya Bakrie. He's also the CEO of Bakrie & Brothers, a leading Indonesian business and business figure global investor, primarily representing Indonesia as a key and critical player when it comes to building sustainable digital investments while also chairing business partnerships in Indonesia. A warm welcome to Mr. Bakrie. Followed by Emmanuel Faber. Emmanuel is the chair of the International Sustainability Standards Board and former CEO and chairman of Danone. He's globally recognized for advancing conversations regarding social equity, responsible investing, good business practices, as well as advancing climate change. Please warmly welcome Mr. Emmanuel Faber. Followed by Ravi Aurora, Senior Vice President, Global Public Policy and Government Affairs at Mastercard. Ravi Aurora takes a key role in being responsible for leading diverse thought leadership conversations, strategic initiatives, as well as public policy and advocacy within the globe, and publicly participating in operations in the Indo-Pacific. A warm welcome to Ravi Aurora. This particular panel discussion will be hosted by a leader within the business media fraternity, an international broadcaster, TV personality, and media consultant, Lerato Mbele. Lerato Mbele certainly needs no introduction on the African continent as a broadcaster and leader of conversations, co-owner of Moon Landing Media and proprietor of the Africa Leadership Dialogue series. She hosts a daily talk show and podcast. A warm welcome to our moderator and speakers joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Gugu, and thank you very much to all of you distinguished guests for your time. Let me begin just with a preamble, just to shape the conversation we're having here this afternoon. We all know Steve Jobs. He's quoted regularly on issues around business science, business practice, marketing, but he famously once said that if you really want to be a pathfinder in business, you should not only give the customer what they want, but you must try to figure out what they will need in the future. And those are the groundbreaking businesses, those that can anticipate the needs of consumers in the future, even before consumers have articulated this. And so when you do that, you create new products and actually new value chains as well. You unlock them. And so the conversation we're having here today, titled New Markets, New Leaders, is about those pathfinders. Those people, those entrepreneurs, those companies that are perceptive about the market and what's to come, that can look at trends and recreate, adapt, reshape demands and channels of distribution, pricing, and their operating models. We already know that the future is reimagined. We've been talking extensively in international fora, even here at the B20, about opportunities emergent in agriculture, in biotech, in green energy, rare earths powering ICT, different forms of mining. We know this. That future has already been reimagined. But what of the multipolar world in which we live, where centers of production are increasingly moving to the global south? And that global south, perhaps, is going to lead to the emergence of new titans of industry, unlock those new markets and those new companies. And so let us reimagine the future within the context of the complex multipolarity and look at the opportunity that will emerge from these new geographies, new consumers, new demographics. And so with those words, thank you very much for your time. Thank you to our panel. Let me introduce them. Anindya Bakrie, Chairman of Kadin Indonesia, CEO of Bakrie and Brothers. Thank you so much, and the warmest welcome to South Africa, my home country, Siyagamgela. Emmanuel Faber, Chairman of International Sustainability Standards Board. Bienvenue ici en Afrique du Sud. Thank you so very much. Ravi Aurora, Senior Vice President for Government Affairs and Policy at Mastercard. Welcome. So let's start with you, Ravi. You are to my immediate right. Obviously, financial inclusion, cybersecurity, governance of tech. Those have become very, very topical issues in the modern day. Digital payments, that's the space in which you play. They've recently turned informal activity into a new market and a lucrative market. But in scaling up, what's one rule that you think you've observed that has enabled digital inclusion, innovation within this disruption, and what are the guardrails?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And again, pleasure to be here with such distinguished panelists. Thank you for having me to the B20 team. You know, with Mastercard as a technology company in the payments business, we have a very deep commitment to financial inclusion and inclusive growth that, you know, brings basically benefit to all segments of society. Yeah. And you know, when I look at Africa here, the continent, the rise of interoperable mobile money ecosystem has brought millions of small businesses, you know, to be connected, and micro entrepreneurs to be connected. And at Mastercard, we are, you know, very committed to expanding Africa's digital economy, and by providing secure, whether it's identity, transactions, you know, and platforms as such, and drive scale to drive inclusive growth. So let me give you an example, because the way we do it is through partnerships. It can only come about through partnerships with central banks, with fintech players, with a variety of players in the system. And agriculture is central to Africa's economy. Yeah. And there, when you look at small leasehold farmers who are there, the small leasehold farmers, they are the backbone of food systems. But, you know, many of them lack identity. They lack access to credit. Yeah. They lack access to markets, right? Access to finance, all of that. So in East Africa and parts of West Africa, what we've done is actually gone and digitized smallholder agriculture payment systems. And we've created a platform called, under our community pass, called Farm Pass. And what that is it's a secure platform that brings together farmer-producer organizations, you know, lenders, the financial institutions, governments, and others onto this platform, so that we can now start building, and farmers have access now to a variety of inputs. So through that, what we are able to do is create that safety and security. And you know, so what can we create? A secure identity. So now, by virtue of a smart card or mobile, we can create an identity so that they are now recognized by cooperatives and lenders. They are able to do digital payment so that now they are less reliant on cash and be able to have money faster and in a more secure fashion. They're able to now get data for credit, where looking at the transaction history of digital history, we are able to build, you know, based on those alternative forms of credit scoring and access to credit. So all of that, and then it opens up new market access for them. So these are the ways in which, you know, you try to drive scale and impact And the impact of that has been that now we have over 2 million farmers in Tanzania, Uganda, all on this ecosystem. They have transacted coffee and maize and other products, giving them better pricing and so forth, right? So it's bringing about efficiency, bringing market access to them. In terms of the regulatory safeguards that you mentioned, I think what is needed is regulatory transparency, and certainty, right? And that is important along with consumer choice. So I think that, I would say, where we have regulatory independence, because today we are living in very interesting times with a lot of fragmentation. And there's a lot of digital sovereignty that is there because everyone's trying to protect their own marketplace. So more we can have regulatory harmonization, certainty, then we reduce barriers to access and help drive scale.
I do like the story of the farmers, because what you've just explained to us is that if you simplify how the farmer can transact, sell, be credit rated, the farmer can concentrate on what they need to do, which is just create food for the population.
And trust is very important here at the underlying.
All right, so we're at the B20, I'm staying with you, and we're having all sorts of conversations about opportunities, guardrails, scaling it up and making sure that regulation is streamlined. How do platforms like this enable the work that you do and others like you to build that scale with the necessary safeguards?
So I think this is where we have to have a very principled approach. You have to minimize bias. You have to, have a lot of, we talk about, artificial intelligence. That's used a lot today in, providing access to credit, the scoring mechanism. So we have to, everything we do has to be inclusive by design, built on like I said, underlying trust. Because, for us at Mastercard, it's very much what we believe in is that when it comes to data, you own it, you decide how it should be used. Our job is to protect it, right? So, and which is why as a company over the last, let's say since 2018, we've invested over $10 billion into safety, security, and cybersecurity, all of those systems to ensure that the ecosystem can be trusted and secure.
You mentioned AI, and everywhere you go, everybody's talking about an AI strategy. Everybody, regardless of the sector. And often you think, is it a buzzword, or really and truly is it going to power every single aspect of how we transact, gather information, and interact in the future? And if that's true, then what are the considerations that people need to be making about that future economy?
Look, I mean, I think like for us, we leverage AI. I want to give you from a perspective of fraud and cyber, because over 125 billion transactions per year. So that when it transacts over our system, it is leveraging artificial intelligence and a lot of tools to be able to minimize and detect fraud, right? And stamp it out as such. Because that's the way we save billions of dollars in fraud losses for consumers, for our financial institutions, and so forth. So the consideration, I think, here is that I think it's a big enabler. It's a big enabler because now, in terms of there's a lot of discussion around agentic commerce, and that can drive a lot of what you need from a consumer perspective, consumer preference, point of view. But at the same time, like you mentioned earlier, those safeguards and guardrails are kind of very important because that will. Technology can leave people behind very soon, and we don't want to risk that.
All right. Let's bring you into the conversation, Emmanuel, Faber, simply because you're seated right next to Ravi. So, firstly, the ISSB. What is the work that you've been doing around setting standards, introducing a more coherent discourse on sustainability? Could you just give us the lay of the land?
Yeah, thank you, Larato. I think if I go back to your initial words about new leaders, new markets, I think this is really a moment where literally every company, every entrepreneur, whether big or small, can become a leader, because the leaders of today are at risk. They are at risk because the world has been built overall in a sort of a linear manner for the last 50 years. And they've grown with that. And we are now in a world where it's very clear, polarized from a political standpoint, and climate change, which is happening everywhere and hitting with physical risks on water access, temperature elevations, and many other issues, including soil health and the rest for those agricultural-based companies and others. So what that actually means is that if you look at the next 10 years, there will be radical shifts of how your value chains need to be structured in order to keep being a leader, and if you're not, to actually build your competitive advantages. In other words, in a super volatile world, you don't build competitive advantages the same way as corporates or even as countries. You need to rethink what is happening. But to do this, you don't have a proper language today. The language of accounting is counting a lot of things, but not everything that counts, basically. The market to book value ratio today is 5 times the balance sheet. And the need for a language that describes risks and opportunities in the value chains and in the time horizons is absolutely critical. There have been like hundreds of metrics and standards and disclosures on sustainability, either the planet sustainability or the business resilience, which is really what we are on. And in 2021, the IFRS Foundation, that brings standards of accounting in about 140 countries, was asked to create what we are doing right now, which is adding to these accounting generally accepted principles, risks and opportunities generally accepted principles.
Right.
And we are 3 years after that. About 40 jurisdictions in the world are implementing those, covering already 60% of the global GDP, which means that there is apparently a big ask for this understanding of value chains, risks and opportunities to redefine those competitive advantages.
Right. And what you've just done is describe to us how sustainability is not just a nice to have, it's not just a conversation on justice and governance and that sort of thing. There's actually a very real trackable profit incentive, cost incentive, lower cost incentive. So let's talk about that. What evidence is there to show that high quality, better interoperable reporting does lower the risk and the cost of capital when you embed sustainability?
Well, I think what it actually starts with is how capital markets work. They work on the pricing of risks and return. So if you only look at accounting, you see about a quarter of what the market is seeing in terms of value. So it means all the rest is there. And therefore, by providing ability to compare company to company on the same risk or the same opportunity, how each of them are dealing with their strategy to alleviate this risk or to create the opportunity, the governance of that, the efficiency of that strategy from a capital standpoint as well, then you can create a competitive advantage for your company. Investors around the world have said over the last 5 years, they need sustainability, competitive understanding of businesses to price and allocate capital properly. The evidence is the fact that already 40 jurisdictions, 60% of global GDP in less than 3 years have started their journey. And by the way, a lot of African jurisdictions, Nigeria came first to say, I will be an early adopter of those standards. And when discussing with the leadership of the country, they were thinking about trade and how this would allow them, because it would bring the transparency that Ravi was referring to in the supply chains, the accountability and transparency. It would raise the conversation about the SMEs that are never in accounting, and suddenly SMEs, smallholder farmers, and all this rich ecosystem is part of the conversation.
I'm glad you mentioned SMEs because we often forget that, certainly in some of the emerging markets, they account for about 70% of jobs that can be created. And so they need to be integrated into some kind of an interoperable reporting system. But what are the bare minimum viable reporting standards or bars that can be integrated for them?
I think that is a very important and ongoing conversation. There is no doubt that those standards about the business resilience and a quasi-accounting language to describe the risks and the opportunities will start and have started already with the largest companies. all the countries that implement them start with the larger companies. Those larger companies have suppliers, and this is where they are being brought into the system. The ask of any large company has to be understood like you don't want to destroy your value chain. You want to ensure that there is proportionality, scalability, transition reliefs that are being brought to ensure that the very small ones are not going to be bothered with that. I'll give you a simple example in one sentence. My company, Danone, thought that the carbon belongs to the soil, where it is the nutrition of the soil, instead of belonging to the air when you do intensive agriculture. So we worked very hard on that. We never asked any of our 300,000 farmers, including in Kenya, here in South Africa, in Nigeria, Morocco, and other places, any information about their greenhouse gas emissions, because we knew how to calculate that based on their type of farming and the place where they were. So there are always opportunities, and digital tomorrow, and technology, and satellites, and other technologies will support the fact that we include all these SMEs into the system.
All right, I want to bring Anindya, Bakrie, and thank you for your patience. Let's get a view now from ASEAN, from Asia as well. High growth markets there, a lot of production going on there. So as we talk about emerging market leaders, de-risking new businesses, new industries, particularly I know you're interested in green industry bets. Let's talk about how we do that. Integrating local suppliers, creating jobs, but observing sustainability, observing inclusion, doing it in a way that really is transformative.
That's a lot of tasks to do. But first, happy to be here. Thank you very much. First time in South Africa. So that's the beginning of South-to-South collaboration already. So Indonesia is one of the now 11 countries in Southeast Asia, or ASEAN. It is $1.3 trillion economy, about 285 million people. The focus in life is to grow from $5,000 per capita to $15,000 as soon as possible. So we get out of the middle income trap. And this is to the extent the same actually with the other neighbors in ASEAN. So the question now is, how are we going to do it? Actually, if we keep growing 5% like the last 30 years, we will get there within 20 years, which is not bad by 2045. But I think living in Indonesia, inclusivity and sustainability is very important. Why inclusivity? Because 60% of the Indonesians are below 40 years old. They need jobs, they need to be involved, they need to have better standards of living. And why sustainability? Because we live in the ring of fire, 17,000 islands, and we're losing islands by the day because of the rising sea level. So it is about livelihood when it comes to sustainability. So for us, I'm here representing Kadin. These are some of my members over here coming as well to South Africa. We are the only business organization in Indonesia by law that work with the government when it comes to economics. So two big things that we see the current government wants to really be serious to work with us. Number one is the decarbonization story, or the energy transition story. And number two is the strategic diversification geographically. Now, decarbonization story comes at least 3 levels that I can see. First, the electrification, or making the supply chain of EV. Now, it is not only the technology that we are choosing, but it is actually how to keep the value additions of the critical minerals processing at home is what we are focusing on. And the second thing also, we want to focus on making sure that the technology and also the employment, as much as possible, stay at home. Right. And we're happy to say that the critical minerals such as nickel, bauxite, copper, they are on the eastern part of the country, where a lot of times in the past, Java in the middle is where the growth is. And lastly, about carbon capture. People know that Indonesia is probably one of the top 3 lungs of the world. We have not only forests, but peatlands, mangroves, but also about 80% of the coral reefs in the world. So we want to protect that, and we hope one day, the carbon market will also reward us to do that, so that we can fuel the growth somewhere else. But the second thing also, just quickly, on the strategic geographic collaborations. Just in the last, I would say, 13 months, our president has had meetings in Indonesia and outside with 41 state leaders.
Wow.
So that means almost one every, 2 weeks. Right? Now, the results have shown. About 2 months ago, we had CEPA with Canada. So that's good to diversify from just one country in North America. But also, 3 months ago, we had the same thing with European Union. So we do try to diversify our relationships in trade and investments. But having said that, we feel that South-to-South collaboration makes a lot of sense. That's why we joined BRICS, for example. And that's why we're here in G20. And that's why also we saw President Cyril Ramaphosa was in Indonesia last month. And the same thing President Lula 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Because we are dealing with the same things. We're dealing that there is no way we can grow 5%, 6% without taking care of the rest of the population. And that's where I think I would like to say
there's many things you've just said to that. The importance of South-South cooperation, exploring new markets. You've also said that any business of this new era has to have a sustainability philosophy embedded, because living on an archipelago like Indonesia, you have to constantly think about people, the planet, plus the job creation, the shared prosperity. So let's talk about the evolution of these ideas as you're building, because you are building something for the future, and how some of these regional and global platforms help to actualize what is a concept in business to something that is bankable on the ground.
Yeah, I think it is quite interesting. Today I had a couple of meetings with our counterparts from the US, South Africa, from Canada. We actually are talking about the same things, right? Number one, we want to have food resilience, right? But we want to do it in a way that is more sustainable, because that is also thinking about the long term. The second thing, we talk about the energy resilience. Everywhere they talk about that, right? But we want to do it in a way that we cannot only depend on finite resources. Fossil fuel, by the way, we started from the fossil fuel, oil and gas, in terms of as a company. But we pivot to critical minerals because we believe this is probably much more sustainable going forward. And to do that within South to South is entirely possible, because I think Africa, just like in Asia, some part of Asia, we're very blessed with critical minerals below the ground. And lastly, everybody's talking about affordability, right? Even in the Western world or developing world. So this, affordability means the financial inclusion that Ravi is talking about is very important. But also, all of this needs money. We have to unlock the capital. That's why we spoke a little bit with Emmanuel that Indonesia is joining the IFRS S1 by 2027, because we want to make sure that as we try to join BRICS, OECD, we go by the international standard in order, because we are an investment grade country already. So if we can follow this, maybe we can help Indonesia to bringing FDI to also fuel the growth.
All right, in the interest of time and very briefly, could you just tell us a little bit about platforms such as ABEC and the B20 Open Market, just so that we're aware how we get some of this collaboration, South-South, ASEAN, Africa, ASEAN, AU?
Well, this is about geopolitics at the end of the day. So, for example, I started with my involvement in APEC, right? About 15 years ago as the chair of APEC Business Advisory Council. What's interesting about APEC is that you have the 21 economies. You have in the Pacifics, you have the China of the world, you have the US of the world. But in the last 5 years, things getting a little bit, heated up among the superpowers. So we see that APEC is losing a little bit of shine. Then we thought to ourselves that maybe we should focus on ASEAN, at least it is in our region. But then we thought ASEAN, despite it is 700 million people, and we have 285 million of that, and they have $4 trillion economy, we feel we have to also hedge our trade and investment partners. And that's why we joined BRICS, because South Africa, China, India, Russia, and Brazil, they also, like I mentioned, experience the same thing. And lastly, I want to say G20. We're very much looking forward for next year, actually, for U.S. leadership, right? Because despite all the geopolitics, headlines, I think U.S. is still an entrepreneurial country. So I think leadership of US 2026 and also APEC 2026 is going to be in China. So I think that's going to be interesting how the world is playing this balance.
2026 will be interesting. As we wrap up the conversation, gentlemen, you can see the timer. There's 3 minutes left, so 1 minute per person. We are here now at the B20, a precursor to the G20, setting the tone for how businesses from the 20 richest economies, including Africa as a continent, can work together, collaborate, find mutual opportunities, but also the guardrails and the things that regulators need to consider. From your point of view, sir, what would you say, Ravi?
I think, this is where the B20, let's say, different task forces and the working groups, we ourselves have been co-chairing the digital transformation task force. So I think that all of which has been very helpful because it helps bring different industries, different perspectives, to provide those recommendations to the G20. And I think when I look at, today, from an infrastructure point of view, governments, right? I mean, everybody is realizing that digital infrastructure is key because everything from facilitating trade, SMEs, we were talking about flow of funds earlier in the BAC panel, 2 days ago. All of those, digitization and the journey around digitization is important. And I think with that, the guardrails around regulatory, because again, as I mentioned, we are in a very interesting geopolitical times right now. So, which is where regulatory certainty, regulatory harmonization is very important from a guardrails perspective, as well as ensuring that any public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure that we talk about is something that is done with public and private, because innovation, you need the innovation that the private sector brings on top of what the public sector provides as rail. So that public-private partnerships are very important to benefit consumers and citizens.
Emmanuel, perhaps your views also on the value of a B20 ahead of G20. And you mentioned, it's important for regulators to make interventions that would avoid fragmentation. Perhaps just elaborate briefly.
Yes, I can be very brief. Actually, it's a privilege for me to be here for the B20 at the very moment where the presidency, South Africa, has decided this week to start their adopting readiness working group for the standards that we are putting together. It is not a guardrail, it is a rail. It is the rail to the future because this is the way capital is going to be allocated into the value chains, whether or not there is political pressure. And for me, it means that the B20 needs to continue the great work of establishing in the value chains themselves that are interconnected all over the place, a simple language that allows those to continue to be allocated appropriate capital.
All right, and Anindya, your views on this issue, especially just briefly, a playbook for regulators. We can see the playbook for industry, but regulators, what they need to consider to create that connection within the global south.
I think regulators, as well as governments, need to work together with business. It's more now than ever. Right? So in Indonesia, for example, they just quickly set up, newly set up sovereign wealth fund, and it's quite sizable for Indonesia indeed. And the idea is to crowd in investors, de-risk investors, and also invite not only domestic investors, but also foreign investors. And we see that the regulators work very closely with Kadin, the Chambers of Commerce and Industry. So, we can think about being on the same page while trying to achieve the same growth anyhow. And lastly, I want to make sure that I say in B20 today, I enjoy South Africa. You're doing a good job.
Oh, you're going to have fun in South Africa. And when you get to America next year, tell them how much fun you had in South Africa. Thank you very much, Anindya Bakrie, Chairman of Kadin Indonesia, Emmanuel Faber, Chairman of the International Sustainability Standards Board, Ravi Aurora, Senior Vice President, Mastercard. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Another round of applause, please, for our panelists as they make their way off stage. Contributing very vibrantly on some of the key lessons we can learn from our peers and counterparts who do join us from their neighboring countries and home countries, but more so who themselves have also found opportunities for partnership with us here in South Africa. Well, we've had an informative session so far on day 2 of the B20 South Africa Summit. It does continue. For now, it is 4 minutes after 1 o'clock on my watch. We will break for lunch over the next hour. We will commence the program promptly at 2 p.m. At 2 p.m., we will commence the program to ensure that we follow through with our build-up to panel discussions, hear from the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, and of course hear from South Africa's President in terms of the closing of the B20 Summit. Please enjoy lunch, ladies and gentlemen. It will be served downstairs at the exhibition store. It is 5 minutes after 1 o'clock. We'll commence the program sharply at 2 p.m. Thank you so much.